To answer that seemingly simple question generated a torrent of response, much of it negative, including from my guest today, Jim Bianco, president of Bianco Research. And Jim, was I wrong to say that it's the Treasury Department and not the Fed that is really in the business of printing money in America today?
Well, you have to define it correctly. If you're talking about the bills in our wallets and who prints that physical currency, it is the Treasury. And the Fed wants us to now redefine money printing as just the U.S. Mint under the guise or under the direction of the U.S. Treasury that prints up money. But 2 years ago and 10 years ago when Bernanke was talking about money printing, he was using a broader definition, meaning the electronic printing press, which is the Fed's reserve accounts and the ability of the Fed to increase the amount of money in all of the bank's reserve accounts. And that's what I think most people on Wall Street mean when we talk about money printing, is the reserve accounts, and that's under the direction of the Fed.
All right, so explain how that works. So the Fed electronically can create money literally out of thin air and deposit it at a bank. Is that basically what happens?
Every bank in the country has an account with the Federal Reserve, and that is their reserve account, and they have to keep a ratio of the amount of assets they have, how big the bank is, to reserves in the account. The Fed has the ability, being that they're the Fed, to go in and just change the number on your reserve account. They could say, now there's more money in there, now there's less money in that account. And the idea there is to either spur banking activity by putting more money in the account or restrict banking activity by taking less money out. All the quantitative easing, the Fed has been buying securities. How do they call a bank? They buy some securities from the bank. How do they pay for them? They say, you have a reserve account with us. We'll now just change the number in that reserve account. If you or I did that, that would be fraud and it would be counterfeiting and we'd go to jail. But when the Fed does it, it's sophisticated monetary policy.
Right. So are those changes in the bank's reserve, that number, is that based on any sort of swap of assets of any kind, whether it's gold that the Fed has or securities that the banks have? Or is it really just switching numbers around?
To the extent that we're talking about QE 1, 2, and possibly 3, it's more of switching numbers around. The dealers or the banks will sell their securities to the Fed, but the Fed doesn't have the money to pay for them, other than that they can change the reserve account number for that particular bank. And that's how they wind up creating money or printing money. Remember, we work in a fractional banking system. We live in a fractional banking system. So when the banks have more reserves and have more ability to lend and buy securities, that is in essence a form of money creation.
I think you know, because we've been talking to each other for a long time, I'm no big fan of the Fed and I'm not here to defend them or Ben Bernanke, but I think he would say, look, I'm trying to prevent the bursting of the housing bubble from causing a deflationary spiral and turning America into Japan. Shouldn't the Fed be acting as aggressively as possible in the face of the deleveraging that's gone on?
To an extent, yes. I won't complain about what the Fed did in the fall of 2008 and the spring of 2009. But if you step back in the larger picture, why did we have a busting of the housing bubble? Why did we have such turmoil in financial markets? Because we had malinvestment, to use that Austrian economics term, and we had markets that were mispriced, and we need to get everything back into equilibrium. So is the Fed trying to guide everything back in equilibrium, or are they trying to prevent it from going to equilibrium? And I'm afraid I'm at the latter camp. They're trying to prevent equilibrium. What I mean by that is maybe housing prices are too high. Maybe financial markets, there's still deleveraging that needs to take place. But the Fed is not trying to manage that process, but trying to stop that process of further falls in housing prices, further deleveraging. And they're trying to hold back that, and that's why things can't get better until we get to equilibrium, and they're making it worse in the long run.
Right, and to that point, at a conference last week, Ben Bernanke said, quote, we need to continue to develop and implement policies that will help the housing sector get back on its feet. So that would suggest that they're not going to change policy anytime soon.
Right, and if the housing market is not on its feet, one could argue that maybe the problem is it's still out of balance. There's still prices are at the wrong place, which is a nice way of saying they have to go lower. And if the Fed wants to pull out every stop from manipulating interest rates to advising the Congress on foreclosure policy to try and prevent prices to go where the market thinks they should, It's not going to make things better. It's just going to hold everything up for a while. If you want an analogy, it's kind of like a patient who's in pain. Well, we'll shoot him up with morphine. Well, we're not fixing the problem, but he does feel better for a while.
All right, we got to leave it there, Jim. Thanks very much.